Start the clock because it is time for the College Football Power Hour. I am Caroline Fenton. He is Adam Breneman, and that over there is Jason Fitz. And now that we've had a little bit of time, we've had a couple of days to breathe. The instant reactions and the overreactions on Saturday are gone. We've had a little bit of time to think on it. We want to break down some things that maybe felt like a big deal on Saturday, but in the grand scheme of things, they're really not that big of a deal. But some things that felt like a massive deal on Saturday, but could have lingering effects throughout the rest of the season. Things that were big deals on Saturday night and continue to be a big deal throughout the rest of the week. Fitz, it's interesting that we're having this Heisman conversation so early into the season. We're having playoff conversations so early into the season. I think that's what a new and changed schedule and playoff structure does to the way that we talk about college football and the future projections that we have. But it's interesting to me how much Heisman talk there is surrounding Travis Hunter. And look, he's the Shohei Ohtani of college football. Yet Vegas doesn't really reflect the same kind of sentiment toward Travis Hunter. Big deal or no deal that Travis Hunter is not getting as much love on the sports books for the Heisman ceremony.
It's the biggest of all the big deals to me. And you mentioned Vegas. Vegas is a huge part of why we're having this conversation, right? Because everybody's putting money down constantly on these things, even though we won't know the outcome for months, right? So where the Heisman lies is no longer a conversation for November, December, because frankly, there's opportunity right now. And I think there's opportunity with Travis Hunter. It is astounding to me, guys, that we're looking at somebody that is not just playing a little bit on both sides. We're looking at somebody that's playing the entire way on both sides. And we're not just looking at somebody that's getting a bunch of snaps. We're looking at somebody that is a star on both sides of the football. And you're telling me that doesn't make you the favorite for the Heisman? Like, if playing at a star level as a wide receiver and as a star level as a corner in Power 4 football doesn't make you a Heisman Trophy favorite, what the hell does? Like, this is not supposed to just be an award, Adam, for the quarterback of the best team in college football. It's supposed to be the best player in college football. And I have a hard time realizing how anybody can be a better player than Travis Hunter, considering he's doing it on both sides of the football.
It is a catastrophe that Travis Hunter is not one of the top two favorites for the Heisman Trophy. Travis Hunter deserves to be in New York at the end of the season. We're witnessing something that is once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime. We have not seen someone like this in my lifetime in college football. Someone who dominates on both sides of the ball the way Travis Hunter does. He played 123 snaps on Saturday, and that's his lowest snap total of the season. When I was playing and I hit 50 snaps in the game, my coaches took me out for the game. He's playing 123. It is remarkable. This is the guy that could win the Biletnikoff Award for best wide receiver in football and the Jim Thorpe Award. He is the best player in the country, and if he plays even remotely like he has played through the first few games of the year, he belongs in New York at the end of the season, without a doubt, Caroline.
Also, real quick, let me chime in here, Caroline, on one other thing, because what you just said, Adam, is so important. Colorado may not end up being a good football team. That doesn't mean anything to Travis Hunter, who is a superstar on both sides of the ball. And we have some tough conversations about what Colorado isn't defensively. That's not on Travis Hunter either. Like, Travis Hunter is playing at an elite level on both sides of the ball, Caroline.
If I'm ever cold and dead on the sidewalk, just whisper into my ear, the Heisman Trophy is an award for the best player in college football and not the quarterback on the best team. And I will become resurrected because that is the blood that runs through my veins. And that is what gives me life, is this conversation about how the Heisman Trophy goes to the best player in college football. Somehow this award became the quarterback or the best player on the best team in America. And a lot of times, sometimes, the best player in college football is the quarterback or the best player on the best team in America. But I am 1000% with you that we are seeing something from Travis Hunter that we have never seen in college football before. His usage, his athleticism, the fact that he's one of the best wide receivers in the country. And oh yeah, by the way, he's also one of the best defensive backs in the country. Colorado might be kind of a doo-doo team this season. Like, they might be, honestly. That, I agree with you, Fitz, has nothing to do with Travis Hunter. I do not think that he should be punished or penalized for being an elite player on a kind of a doo-doo team. I'm with you. If I had a vote, I wish I did, and I don't. Shout out to the Heisman Committee. I'd like one day. I would vote for Travis Hunter today if the voting happened today.
Let's get Carolina vote for the Heisman Trophy, first of all. Second of all,
it's my campaign.
The stats are remarkable. 13 catches, 2 touchdowns, including on defense an interception. He's a remarkable player. I think we all agree on that. Caroline, the talk of the town Saturday was the Georgia-Kentucky game. Georgia's offense struggling against Kentucky. Big deal or no big deal?
It's a big deal to me. And that's one of those games that I think could go either way, that on a Saturday night, you eke by a really gritty and gross win on the road. You can sometimes wake up on Sunday morning and say, you know what? We're still undefeated. We went on the road in the SEC in a tough environment, and we got to win, and that's all that matters. I think what we saw on Saturday from Georgia, though, could be concerning for a few reasons. Georgia had 63 total yards in the first half against Kentucky. That's the fewest that Georgia has had in a single half since 2009. Georgia put up 13 points at Kentucky. That's their fewest point totals since Clemson, the opening game of the 2021 season. Now, I understand Georgia went on to win the national championship that year, but I think that just kind of goes to show that over the last few seasons, Georgia hasn't been that low-scoring kind of grinded-out kind of team. That's not how they've won football games. This game has been compared a lot to the Auburn game last season at Jordan-Hare and to the Missouri game in 2022 in Columbia, Missouri. I compared it myself. But after our show on Saturday, I kind of took a step back and I wanted to look at exactly what the parallels were between those 3 games. What was it that gave Georgia trouble? And what I didn't find was a parallel, but what I did find was something that was different about this game than the last 2 games, which makes it kind of unfair to compare this game to that 2023 game at Auburn and that 2022 game at Missouri. In 2022 at Missouri, Georgia turned the ball over twice. Missouri was able to turn that into 3 points. Not a lot, granted, but in a 26-22 game, 3 points feels like a lot. Against Auburn last season, Georgia also turned the ball over twice. Auburn was able to turn that into 14 points. Against Kentucky, Georgia actually won the turnover battle. They didn't turn the ball over, and Kentucky did turn the ball over, and Georgia was able to turn that into 3 points. So in those 2 games in previous seasons, you're able to look at it and say, okay, well, Georgia was handing their opponents opportunities and handing their opponents points. That wasn't the case here. You just happened to go toe-to-toe in a slugfest with a Kentucky team that completed 6 passes against South Carolina the week prior. And I'm not saying that Georgia's offense is terrible and that they're no longer a national title contender and that Georgia fans should just pack it up and look ahead for 2025. Of course not, because I believe in Kirby Smart. I believe in Carson Beck. I still think this team is a national title contender. We've seen Carson Beck develop as a quarterback over last season. I think he can continue to do that this season. All I'm saying is Georgia's offense might have more to diagnose this season than it has in years prior. And I think it starts with the offensive line. And it also starts with Carson Beck and that chemistry with his receivers, because it was on full display to be lacking on Saturday night in Kroger Field.
Georgia's offense struggling the way they did is a big deal for the whole landscape of the SEC in college football. It changes everything when you think about that conference. Their struggles on offense come down to one key thing in these games. In critical moments, in the biggest moments of the game, an offense has to have someone who can make a play. When everyone in the stadium knows the ball's going to a certain player, that player still has to be able to get open and make plays and move their team and their offense down the field by making tough catches or making big runs. Georgia doesn't have a guy who is dynamic and can get open anytime, anywhere, any place, like the 7-Eleven, open 24/7. They don't have that player. Add that on top of an offensive line that couldn't get movement against a Kentucky team that got crushed by South Carolina. Add that onto an offense that couldn't score in the red zone or couldn't score touchdowns in the red zone, 3 red zone trips, 2 of them resulted in field goals. Carson Beck, I thought, looked like an average quarterback, and he has the ability to be an elite player, but he needs to play elite. We're talking about a guy that was averaged 6 yards per completion on Saturday. So we know Georgia has a high ceiling, but Georgia also showed us what their floor really is. And with their schedule in the SEC, they will lose games if they play the way they played on offense on Saturday, Fitz.
Yeah, you say their schedule. I think it's important to note they still got to play Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. What do those 4 teams have in common? They can all score on you from anywhere at any time, and they all have quarterbacks that can absolutely abuse you. So you're not going to be able to beat them if all you can do is score 13 points. Guys, the other part of this is let me to be clear here. I hate excuses from great teams, from national championship caliber football teams. I don't want to hear your excuse. I'll buy rivalry week if I have to. You can never predict what's going to happen on rivalry week. But this happens every year where a team in the SEC struggles against a team they shouldn't, and suddenly SEC fans come in and say, well, it's just so unpredictable when you go into Kentucky. And then Big Ten fans try and tell me it's just so unpredictable when you have to take on Iowa. No, it isn't. If you're a great football team, it shouldn't be unpredictable. If you are judged by national championships, you should not struggle against bad teams. This was a Georgia team that came out flat. To your point, Adam, did not move the line of scrimmage. They couldn't get anything going offensively. To your point also, we've seen that some of those guys that were, there for them on Saturdays last year are doing great things on Sundays in the NFL. They don't have that guy right now. I understand all of the reasons, but I'm not going to buy the excuses that, well, sometimes you just got to get the gritty win in a tough environment in Lexington. No, that is not a tough environment if you're as good as Georgia is supposed to be. Texas, I'll buy. Alabama, I'll buy. Knoxville, I'll buy. I'm not buying that you should struggle against Kentucky if you are truly the number one team in the country, and that's why I think the AP poll got it right. I think Georgia could have fallen farther, and Georgia needs to clean it up now, or they are going to be absolutely doomed when they take on teams that can actually score.
And that is the key difference. Another one over the last few seasons. In 2022, Georgia had the 94th ranked strength of schedule. Last season, it was the 63rd ranked strength of schedule. This year, it's the 20th. And all the teams that you just named, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, majority of those, if not all of those games, are on the road for Georgia. You think Kroger Field's intimidating? Just wait until you get a packed Neyland Stadium and a potentially undefeated Tennessee team as Georgia comes in. That's not going to get any easier. Again, I'm not saying the sky is falling in Athens, Georgia, but I am saying there are some underlying issues with Georgia's offense, and they will not go undefeated if they continue to persist. I'm not ignoring the first half of that Clemson game when they were only able to muddle out 6 points.
No, I think it's going to be curious. And I just looked it up, by the way, to your point. They are at Alabama. They are at Texas. They are at Ole Miss. They do get Tennessee at home. But, man, that Ole Miss game, I'm circling that. That environment, everybody's going to be that is going to be a wild one. Okay, as we break down some of the big deal, no deals, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute, but I'll let you decide. Is it a big deal finally? Because we've yelled a lot about Michigan. They finally make a change at starting quarterback to put an Orji in. What do you think? Big deal, no deal?
Michigan making a change at quarterback does not change how I feel about their season at all. It is not a big deal, and Michigan's going to struggle no matter who their quarterback is. Alex Orji is a talented player, and I believe will have a good college career. But this is the guy, Alex Orji, that everyone around that program wanted to be the starting quarterback this season. Every coach wanted him to be the starter in training camp. There was buzz around spring ball and training camp that he was going to maybe win the starting job. He was going to take over. He's the big-time recruit. Everyone wanted him to be the guy. The fans were waiting for it to happen, and it didn't happen. So what's that tell you about how Alex Orji performed in camp and how he compared with Davis Warren, who hasn't been very good this season, and we know isn't as talented as Alex Orji. Alex Orji is much more talented than Davis Warren, but he clearly doesn't have the intangibles, the understanding of the offense, and the leadership that would have allowed him to be the starter. Michigan has a quarterback problem, and changing your quarterback doesn't just fix your quarterback problem. And on top of that, Michigan doesn't have playmakers on the outside. They don't have the Roman Wilson type of player. Their O-line is a step behind. They're losing the most important parts of football games, the time possession, turnover. You add that together with a quarterback now starting to give yourself some life in Alex Orji, who didn't win the job when he was supposed to, and Michigan's going to continue to struggle no matter who their quarterback is.
I want to see Michigan and Sharon Moore let Alex Orji loose. Every time he comes onto the field, it feels like it is so conservative. It's just hand the ball off or it's run it with Alex Orji. I want to see what he can do. This is not the Michigan of 2023. This is not a national championship contending Michigan team. So let me see what the young quarterback has got. If you're going to put him out there, if he's going to be your starter, let him loose, Fitz. I want to see it.
Yeah, I agree with you. The timing of this one was what sort of was curious to me, because if you're going to put a young kid in, give him his first chance, You're putting him in against USC, who may not be as good as USC of old, but like they got Minnesota in a week. It just feels like Minnesota would have been a much more favorable matchup. So I think that speaks to something that we've said every week here, which is, man, the fact that they haven't made a change even in game is a little bit surprising to me. Like if Orji comes in and struggles because he just hasn't had a ton of reps, I, again, will put that on more on the coaching staff for Michigan, who have had opportunities in these first few games to just make a change and see if they could get a real spark. But to your point, Caroline, when he has gotten in the game, there hasn't been any flavor to it. And I feel like they've sort of kept him locked in a little box. So maybe they think there's a competitive advantage, Breneman, but like I have a hard time buying it. I think it's a tough spot for a first start for a quarterback.
It's a very tough spot for Alex Orji in a huge game that Michigan really has to find a way to win to get this season on track. The one area it will look different when you watch Michigan is I believe Michigan will now be running the football 50, 60 times a game. Having Alex Orji now allows you, with Davis Warren on the bench behind him, allows you to really use Alex Orji as another running back in the game. Allow him to use the +1 run game, to do quarterback design runs inside, outside, on the perimeter. We will see a different looking Michigan offense, and the struggle for them has been getting this run game going. Donovan Edwards hasn't looked like what everyone thought he looked like, their star running back. So having Alex Orji now gives them a chance in the run game. There's too many issues, and Alex Orji at some point is going to have to throw the football to win games. I don't believe he's shown he can do it.
You just made a sneaky good point, though. By having a quarterback on the bench, they may feel a little bit more comfortable letting Orji run around than some programs would. That's a smart. So I hadn't thought of that till you said it. That's a sneaky good point by you, man.
I'd be shocked if Orji doesn't run the ball 20 sometimes against USC. They'll be running him inside. They won't care about his if he makes it through the game. Like they're going to use him as a running back in this game and try to get some life going for their offense.
I'm going to take the rest of the show off now and go hammer the over on whatever the rushing totals are for Alex Orji. There we go. You guys
hammer it.
There we go.
And I think every football old head, the founders of the game of football, hear you saying they're going to run it 50, 60 times a game, and they're saying, hell yeah.
It's Michigan football, man.
How the game was intended to be played. That's God's game right there. Okay, question for both of you, and this is probably something that I wouldn't have brought up in the former structure of the college football playoff or in the BCS, something that probably wouldn't have mattered to any of us or anyone listening, but I think it's relevant this year. Is it a big deal or not a big deal how good Group of 5 schools have played and have looked through 3 weeks? And the reason why that's relevant is because a Group of 5 team is going to the college football playoff. We just saw Toledo go into Starkville and embarrass Mississippi State. Obviously, Northern Illinois with the massive upset against Notre Dame. We saw USF keep it close for 3 quarters against Alabama. They'll have another opportunity against Miami. We saw Memphis upset Florida State and Tallahassee. A lot of Group of 5 schools that have playing well and have had one really big games. Is that a big deal, Adam?
The Group of 5 playing well is an enormous deal for college football because it's got an impact on the college football playoff, Caroline, like you said. And just think about how good some of these Group of 5 teams have been. You mentioned some of the big wins, but some of the scares too. Boise State and Idaho scaring Oregon, Bowling Green taking Penn State to the wire. I heard enough about that from you guys. South Florida taking Alabama to 3 quarters. So it's huge for college football because it just adds a whole new element to the game. This is the result of the new era of college football that we are in. The portal, the transfer portal, thins out the depth for the power teams in college football. So it's not even necessarily backup players. It's the number 2 or number 3 receiver at a Big Ten school that wants to go to a top Group of 5 school and be the guy, be the man. It's a star player at an FCS program that now wants to transfer up and play at Bowling Green or Toledo and be the man at the FBS stage and make some NIL money. So the portal, for all the flack it's gotten, has caused this in college football, and it's now more parity in our sport, which I think is great for college football. More games that are competitive, and now with the college football playoff, the way it is with the highest ranked Group of 5 team getting an automatic bid to the playoff, the days of us just monitoring for one team to maybe go undefeated and get some kind of outside chance to make the playoff are gone. It's now a multi-conference, multi-layer, multi-dimensional piece that we have to figure out that we'll have to look at every single week, and it's going to be fun to see which one of these Group of 5 teams is the one that gets the shot at the whole thing.
A little curious why neither of you have mentioned UNLV in your conversation about Group of Five. Thank you.
Take a shot. Fitz mentions UNLV.
There we go. Getting a UNLV mention. And send me some gear, guys. Like I'm trying this every week. Okay, now that I've got my plug in for gear, UNLV coming off the big win over Kansas, by the way.
Yep.
But they do deserve that plug.
Yeah,
that was a hell of a win.
I can't believe we didn't mention them. That's great.
UNLV, by the way, in the others receiving votes column, and they have Boise State coming up in a few weeks. So there is the traction there. I think, we're going to see one of these teams make the playoffs. I've also, for the last, 7-8 years, I've done a weekly phoner with ESPN in Memphis. And I've talked a lot about Memphis football. And it's funny because I think a lot of people outside of Memphis may not realize how important that program is. There was, when Game Day went there a few years ago, that was so significant because Memphis almost shuttered the doors and closed down football. And people forget that. And they found a way to keep it open. And a couple years later, Norvell had them so good that Game Day was there and it was a real piece. And I think what we have to remember is that this conversation isn't just about right now. If you're Memphis, UNLV, Boise State, any of these Group of Five teams, you just mentioned the recruiting and the transfer portal, Adam. I think we have to also remember what this sales pitch is. If you are a kid that wants the chance to compete against the best and you're going to the Mountain West, if you're going to a Group of Five school, you're going to Memphis, part of the sales pitch now is, hey, we can get you to the college football playoff. That is not something that you can pitch as easily at Wisconsin. You can't pitch that as easily at Vanderbilt. You can't pitch that as easily at Duke. You can't pitch that as easily for most of these schools. But for these Group of Five, there are going to be 4 or 5 Group of Five schools that just keep hammering investment into the transfer portal because they know they might get the also-rans that people aren't interested in. But if they get the right athletes in there, they pay the right athletes to come in and play, they can offer that athlete exposure and college football playoff opportunity, which is going to make people. We see this in the NCAA tournament. Like John Morant, a great example of somebody that people didn't really fall in love with till they saw him in the NCAA tournament. How many of these little wide receivers at MAC schools are going to go into a playoff game, put up 200 yards, and all of a sudden we're going to talk about their draft stock just skyrocketing. So I think the long-term effect of the Group of Five being this good is the Group of Five is going to continue to get better and better players that want an opportunity to shine in those playoff moments where they may just sort of be lost on a roster somewhere else. Big fish, little pond. But guys, I think that's real for the future of college football.
I 100% agree. And I think it is important to point out, though, when the transfer portal giveth, the transfer portal also taketh away. You talk about some of these guys that may be committed to Alabama or Ohio State or some of these big-time programs. They sit on the bench for a couple of years. You don't want to do that anymore. You go to a Group of Five school, or maybe a Group of Six school, if we're going to talk about that now, and they get their experience and they show off how good they are. They show off their talent and they prove that they're ready to take that next step. Well, what's stopping those players from transferring away from those Group of Five programs? And now they're developed. Now they're going into their 5th year of college football. Now they're ready to step into the Alabamas and the Georgias and the Ohio States and the Michigans of the world. So yes, now the Group of Five is going to be feeling that trickle-down effect of the depth that really no longer exists at some of these Power 4 programs, but they also will feel kind of a trickle-up effect whenever those players come in and they get developed and they prove themselves at maybe a less competitive level of football.
Adam, real quick, I know you want to chime in. I will say, I'm going to credit Adam. I was watching one of his Instagram reels today, and he was talking about recruiting and how, 80% of being a college football coach is about recruiting and 20% is about development. And you can be a great recruiter and move up, even if you're not a great coach. I thought it was a brilliant reel by you. It was really smart, but it also speaks to who you have to be, who you have to have on your staff. If you're one of these Group of Five schools, you got to have grinders that can get out there and can relate to kids. And you keep getting those kids, because you're right, Caroline. The minute these kids have a tremendous amount of success, the presumption is going to be they'll go play somewhere else for more money. So you're going to constantly be backfilling all of that.
If in college football, and I said it on that reel, Fitz, that it's 80 to 90% talent acquisition for the Power 4 teams and only 10 to 20% talent development. But now with the Group of Five teams, there's a bigger slice in there that is now retention of your own roster. And you are recruiting your own roster every single day. Now, to your point, Fitz, about the opportunity for Group of Five schools to say to their players, why would you go transfer to a low-tier SEC team? Why would you go to Mississippi State when you can play here and we have a chance to make the playoff if we play well? They'll never make the playoff at those Power 4 teams, so they got to win their conference. Then they got to compete with Notre Dame and all these others for the at-large bids. If we play well and handle our business, look at our schedule, we can do it. We'll be in the playoff. So that retention gets a tad bit easier, not easy, but easier for these Group of Five teams. It's all about talent acquisition in college football. It's who can get the best players. It's not the X's and O's, it's the Jimmies and Joes. And And the group of 5 teams now getting better talent is translating to the on-field success we've seen against the big-time programs.
Spreading the love around a little bit, if you will. We'll take a quick break. On the other side, there's a new number 1 in town. Did the AP poll get it right? All right, back here on the pod, the AP poll is out. Texas with the number 1 spot, leapfrogging the Georgia Bulldogs at number 2.
Oh, can we now say Texas is back, guys? Is it like the odds?
I think it's official. Like, it is now official.
You're number 1. You're back, right?
Poor Sam Ellinger. That's gonna haunt him forever. Longhorn Nation, we're back. He was just a few years early. He could see. He had a little crystal ball. He could see into the future, and we just didn't understand what was to come for the Texas Longhorns. But that's exactly what I want to start with our Goldilocks rankings. What's too high? What's too low? What's just right? I could make a very strong argument for either Texas or Georgia to be the number 1 team in the country. Texas looked completely unstoppable, has looked unstoppable through 3 weeks. You go on the road at Michigan in the reigning national champs house where they don't lose very often, and you kind of embarrass Michigan in their own house. That's incredibly impressive. You could make the argument that Georgia going on the road in the SEC and winning, although it wasn't pretty, it was more impressive than a blowout win at home against UTSA. I think there's very fair arguments either way, but I'll ask you, Fitz, did the AP poll committee get it right? Should Texas be the number 1 team in the country?
Yes. And by the way, I usually find myself arguing with Adam. Now I get to argue with Caroline. You can't tell me that Georgia looked like a number 1 team. In fact, you can't tell me Georgia looked better than Alabama. I mean, just realistically.
No, I would agree this past week, but I would say that Georgia against Clemson looked much better than Alabama looked against USF if we want to look at the entire resume through 3 weeks.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think Clemson's trash. So, I just don't think Clemson's a good football team. So I think Georgia has beaten a couple of trash teams, and then, they squawked by. They made it past.
They squawk.
Squawked. We're going to make new words up. Please hit me up and let me know what the past tense of, squeaked by Kentucky. Look, I think Georgia's going to be just fine, by the way. And that's the hardest part of the AP poll. When everybody yells and screams about it, realistically, it works itself out by the end of the year. And this will work itself out. But Texas, clearly the number 1 team in the country. I mean, to play as explosively as they're playing, and then to, on top of that, do it with Arch getting time. I know it wasn't a great opponent, but to me, Texas clearly number 1. I would have had no problem if they dropped Georgia beneath Alabama, Ohio State. I would have even had no problem if they dropped them beneath Tennessee. I know it's going to be different, but right now it's out of sync. So, Adam, I think Texas number 1 was absolutely the right pitch.
I thought the committee completely got it right with Texas at 1 and Georgia at 2. And I thought about this long and hard. Texas clearly is number 1, right? 2 quarterbacks that can start anywhere in the country. O-line's elite. Defense is lights out. That I think most of America agrees on. I wanted to move Georgia lower on my poll when I was putting it together. I wanted to put them behind Ohio State and Alabama. But when I thought about it, and you think about Georgia football, and we've talked about it on the show, guys, Georgia gets a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. They've had close wins before in past couple seasons and then found a way to put it together down the stretch. In college football, we reward wins, and wins are hard to come by, especially in the SEC and in your conference. And Georgia has now beaten Clemson and Kentucky. Ohio State, who I believe may have the best roster in the country, has beaten Akron and Western Michigan. So
that's a very fair point, by the way.
Based on that, I can't move Georgia behind Ohio State. And Ohio State was at 3. I think they're the 3rd best team in the country, and that's not a swap I could make. So I believe Georgia belongs at 2, and the AP poll got it right.
By the way, Ohio State's going to hit that. They're going to hit that moment in mid-October when they get Oregon, Nebraska, Penn State back to back to back. Then we'll know how good Ohio State is.
And we'll find out very soon when it comes to Alabama on September 28th who the real top team in the SEC is between. Well, I guess we got Texas between Georgia and Alabama. That one's going to be fun to watch, and that'll resolve all the conversation about where those 2 teams should be.
And for the record, I don't think that the committee got it wrong. I don't think that the AP poll got it wrong. I think that there were multiple right answers. So I'll play devil's advocate here. If Texas going on the road and beating Michigan, while Georgia just stomped on Tennessee Tech, wasn't enough for Texas to leapfrog Georgia in week 2, why is Texas stomping their foot on UTSA enough to leapfrog Georgia when Georgia beat a conference opponent? I understand it's Kentucky. I understand that this is a team that completed 6 passes the week before. Like, Kentucky's not any sort of world beaters. But I would say, in terms of the difficulty meter, in terms of the importance factor, beating Kentucky on the road is more impressive to me than beating UTSA at home.
It is, but there's also like this full body of work moment. Like, if you've gone on a few dates with somebody and you think, wow, this is really magical, this is amazing, and then you have one bad date, like, you're not suddenly not calling the person back. You're like, it was one bad date. If the next date, it gets a little out of control again, you're like, all right, you know what, now suddenly we're gonna calm this down. We're not gonna text back right away.
Flags.
Like, I think, right, like, there's just this point where it's like, it's not any one thing with Georgia. It's like, you finally look around, you're like, man, I know she's beautiful, and I know I should love her, but there's enough of a problem here that I'm just gonna dial it back a little bit, and then we'll see if we can fall in love later.
Fitz, are you speaking from experience here?
I have no comment whatsoever. No comment. I'm probably the one that doesn't get text back. That's the way that works.
Come on.
You had all the green flags, and then all of a sudden, I found out you don't brush your teeth. Eek. Yikes.
Okay, that's there's no text back. Like, you're not coming back from that one.
Yeah,
I mean, that's no.
Adam, who's too high in the AP poll?
I like that you qualified it to make sure that we know that we're talking about the AP poll.
AP poll, yeah.
Yeah, just in case anybody forgot, we went off on our tangent about dating. We're bringing it right back on the rails here. We are talking about rankings.
Perfect.
But if anybody's too high listening to this, it's fine. This is a safe space.
Speaking of too high, Missouri. Missouri is too high in the AP poll. Missouri is not the 7th best team in college football. Missouri beat Buffalo, they beat Murray State, and then they beat a Boston College team that doesn't have a ton of talent by 6 points. I don't consider that an impressive win for the said number 7 team in the country. In that Boston College game, Missouri looked like they were going to lose for half of it until Boston College quarterback Tommy Castellanos threw a bad interception. Boston College, I talked to their head coach this summer in an interview, said their NIL budget is $600,000 a year. So that's the kind of talent Boston College has. And in that game, Missouri was undisciplined. They lost the penalty battle. I didn't see an impressive team that's among the top echelon of the SEC. You look at the teams behind Missouri in the AP poll. Miami at number 8, Oregon at number 9, Penn State at 10, and USC at 11. Missouri would be the underdog, I believe, on a neutral site to all 4 of those teams tomorrow. I would pick all 4 of those, Miami, Oregon, Penn State, USC, to beat Missouri in a game next week. So that's when I'm looking at who's too high. I compare them to the teams behind them, and I would take all those teams to finish better than Missouri does this year. Missouri is a good SEC team. They don't have the talent to compete with the big dogs. Their talent, as we saw on last Saturday, is more on par with the middle of the ACC team, Boston College, than it is the number 7 ranked team in the country.
Now, I'd add Utah to that list, too. Utah beneath them. And I think on a neutral field right now, that's sort of the answer that I always look for. On a neutral field, if I had to bet my house on these 2 teams playing each other, who would I bet on? And I think you're 100% right. And I feel bad saying this because Missouri hasn't done anything wrong. It's just, I don't watch Missouri. It's like the dreaded eye test that we always look at for the committee with. I don't watch Missouri and think, there's a national championship contender. And if you're going to be ranked that high, if you're number 7, then you should be, man, I can hang with all the big boys and I could win the Natty this year. Missouri just feels like a cute story this year. They don't feel like a championship caliber football team, Carolyn.
But Fitz, who is too low?
Nebraska? And maybe I'm falling in love here with Breneman's prediction.
Yeah, you are.
Because, but here's the thing. I came in super cynical, right? And this is one thing about me. I will admit when I'm wrong, right? I came in super cynical, and I watched the first game, and I thought, man, no, this isn't, no. And I watched the second game, and I'm like, I don't know. You just keep watching, and you're like, man, Raiola is just... He's dynamic. The play calling, Matt Rule just has like the offense itself is so fun to watch. I feel like Nebraska is being slept on here. And the fact that Nebraska is rated under Clemson, like, did I miss something? I know Clemson came out and righted the wrong, but last time I checked, they still don't have a quarterback that you trust in a big matchup. I don't think they have the speed or talent to compete with the best teams in the country. And I think Nebraska actually kind of does. Like, I think Nebraska would give most of the teams we've talked about here a much tougher game than Clemson would. So I know we're talking about the low 20s, and you're sitting there saying, do we really care? But if I'm Nebraska ranked at 22 and Clemson ranked at 21, I'm looking around saying, really? Like, I would have no problem with Nebraska being above Clemson, above Iowa State, above Michigan, above Notre Dame. I'd be okay with all of those. Like, Notre Dame's been so up and down. I think Nebraska right now is probably about 4 slots too low, Adam.
Fitz, I want to officially welcome you to the Nebraska hype train. It's going to be a fun ride.
Dare we call it the Corn Hub?
And the Corn Hub, yes. And we are honored to have you on board. We're honored to have you on board, Fitz. Nebraska,
I'm going to really make sure I type in Corn Hub carefully.
Yeah, be very careful.
You don't want to search that on Google.
Yeah.
Nebraska should be ranked ahead of Clemson. The Clemson being ranked ahead of Nebraska is a travesty. I don't know how it happened. We know what kind of team Nebraska is. And you just said it, Fitz. Dylan Raiola, a dynamic quarterback. They played their very best against Colorado when the entire nation was watching on TV. Defense is fast and physical. We know what Matt Rule does and how he builds program. That's what they are. We don't know what kind of team Clemson is at all. If Nebraska played Clemson tomorrow to do the neutral site test at a neutral site, I'm taking Nebraska 10 times out of 10 in that game. Now, what really matters for Nebraska is getting to 7-0 and being a top 10 team, top 15 team in the country with their showdown against Ohio State. Then they can shut up all the haters once they're 7-0 and ready to play Ohio State.
If we're going to split hairs here, I do have a nitpicky point that I'd like to bring up to Adam because it's about your boys. Why is Penn State ranked higher than USC? Penn State at 10, USC at 11. USC has a top 25 win. Penn State does not. Now, granted, USC beat a top 25 team at a neutral site. Penn State went on the road at West Virginia. I'll give them credit for that. But in terms of total offense, USC has a higher ranked total offense. It's kind of a wash in terms of total defense. I think it's, a toss-up between the two so far. But I look at USC's win over LSU in week 1, and I say that's more impactful than a win on the road at West Virginia, whose best win is against Albany. Only win is against Albany.
Penn State is a more complete team right now than USC from what we've seen. USC's win against LSU was impressive and showed that USC is back on defense and they played physical and were completely different. I don't know how good LSU really is. I mean, that's an LSU team that almost lost to South Carolina, was down 17-0, and then South Carolina pissed the game away. So it's a good win, but Penn State is a more complete team. They are elite on defense. They have a quarterback in Drew Aller that's won big games. They have a dynamic running game on offense. I look at Penn State as a team that there are no question marks about Penn State right now. Penn State fits perfectly in that spot of 8th to 11th in the country from a team ranking standpoint, and we kind of all know what you're going to get. I'm not sure when I turn USC on against Michigan what I'm going to see out of USC. I'm still not entirely sure. I don't know what version we're going to get of that defense. I need to see it one more time before I'm ready to anoint USC as better than Penn State in the Big Ten.
Are we not still scarred by the past defenses of USC to some level? I think even though they've made all the change you could ask them to make, I do think there's a fair, I want to believe in that, but I don't know. I think both sides in this argument, James Franklin has got to find a way to win these sorts of big games, right? Like, so if we're talking about a neutral field between these two teams, I'd be a little nervous about James Franklin, and I'd be a little nervous about USC's defense, and I would just not play that game. Like, there would be no action in that game for me. The degenerate would be sitting on the sideline saying, I'm afraid to bet it. So, but I think it's a fair question, Caroline.
And to be fair about the ghosts of USC's defenses of past, I don't think that we're actually going to see this USC defense challenged until they play Penn State. I don't think that their defense is going to be challenged against Michigan this week, and I don't think they're going to be challenged against a Wisconsin team that just lost their starting quarterback. I don't think they're going to be challenged at Minnesota. It really comes down to mid-October against Penn State when we're going to see that defense, if it really is, revived and rehabbed as much as it should be versus how bad it was last season and has been under Alex Grinch.
This is terrible for what we do for a living. I understand that we love to react and be loud about everything. I'll also remind college football fans, other than Florida State last year, every single argument about playoff seeding, AP polls, works itself out for the very reasons you just said. These teams are going to play each other. What we don't know now, we will find out in a month. Nobody wants to wait that long, but right now, every time we post any video, people are yelling and screaming, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, guess what? College football kind of works itself out. It works itself out every single time. Fans don't want to hear that. They want to get up in arms about every single reaction we have. But by the end of the year, The good teams are going to win. The bad teams are going to lose. It's all going to kind of work out, and probably the top 12 teams are going to be fairly clear. It's far more boring. It's like Fast and the Furious. You know how the movie's going to end? We're going to know how these movies end by the end of all of this.
But we want to know now.
I know. That's fair.
We want the answers now. I demand it. I want my money and I want it now. All right, we'll take a quick break. Let's put a bow on week 3 and look ahead to week 4. The games that we are binging, streaming, and skipping just after a quick break. All right, let's look ahead to week 4. What are we binging? What are we streaming? What are we skipping? Adam, what are you binging, streaming, and skipping?
I'm binging Oklahoma, Tennessee. It's a great game on paper, but the biggest thing I'm watching is these two quarterbacks, Jackson Arnold, Oklahoma, Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee. It is their first opportunity in a huge game as starters at their schools to see how they perform. And to see how, with all the pressure and their whole team looking at them to lead their program, how those two guys play. And this game will have a huge impact on what those two guys' careers look like moving forward at both schools. It's a confidence game. It's a prove-it game. It's a prove your 5-star ranking game for both these players, and the whole country's going to be watching. This one's got all the makings to be a classic, and those two quarterbacks are the storyline for me.
And then just to add all of the storylines as well. Josh Heupel comes back to Oklahoma, Oklahoma's golden child, who then came back as the offensive coordinator under Bob Stoops. He got fired. He goes to Tennessee, revives his career. And oh yeah, by the way, it just so happens to be Oklahoma's SEC debut. So it's like both sides are just, chomping at the bit to get this opportunity. It's oozing in storylines, Fitz.
Yeah, I also think that this is the national awakening that we're about to have for the defensive side of the ball. We've been talking about on this pod for weeks from Tennessee. There is a level of speed and explosiveness to Tennessee's defense at every level that I think is really going to shine here. And I got to say this loud. For everybody that at the end of this year is going to talk about Texas getting into the SEC faster and easier than Oklahoma, I would remind you to look at their schedules. Not all things are built the same. Oklahoma's schedule is brutal. This is part of that. Texas' schedule, while not easy, is not as bad, right? So everybody needs to calm down a little bit when the Oklahoma thing doesn't go necessarily the way Oklahoma fans want it to out of the gates. I think this is a big win opportunity for the Vols. I think the Vols not only win this game big, but in the process, they let everybody know that they are truly a national championship contender. They can beat you on both sides of the ball. They can beat you with special teams. I struggle to find a true glaring weakness for this Tennessee football team right now. I think what has been built in Knoxville looks like it is about to be very special.
I think that the lone weakness that I can identify right now is the inexperience of Nico Iamaleava. The one weakness is the thing that we don't really know. And we'll probably see that this weekend. This is his first true road trip. I know that he started in the bowl game. This is going to be the first true defensive test that I think he's faced. And I understand he faced Phil Parker's defense in Iowa in the bowl game last season, but it's a bowl game, and that doesn't really mean the same thing to me. So going up against this Oklahoma defense that has a veteran defensive front, an Oklahoma team that's been carried by their defense for the most part so far, Nico Iamaleava struggled a little bit against NC State. He had a couple of costly turnovers, but the run game and the defense were able to keep themselves in it. We saw a lot of poise from Nico, a lot more poise than I think you could expect from a first-time starting quarterback and a young quarterback. But this is yet another test in the chapter of year 1 of Nico Iamaleava. I'm not going to say that he's a weakness necessarily, more so an unknown.
Caroline, it's also a huge game for Oklahoma and Brett Venables and what he's building in Norman. You think about the Venables' time so far. He's in year 3 now. Hasn't been great. Yes, they were 10-3 last season, but that's not the expectation at Oklahoma. And now year 1 in the SEC, a huge opportunity to get a statement win in his era now of what the new Oklahoma is going to look like in the SEC. You add in that Oklahoma ran their quarterback out of town, Dylan Gabriel, who's now a Heisman Trophy candidate at Oregon, and replaced them with Jackson Arnold, the 5-star, because they didn't want to keep him waiting anymore. That was a huge decision that Brett Venables made in this game against Tennessee, one of the top teams in the country, is a chance to prove that was the right decision and that Brett Venables is the right leader for Oklahoma football.
Yeah, and speaking of leaders, the one thing I would say is that I think it's important to note, your point on Nico is important. But Josh Heupel does a great job of simplifying offenses for quarterbacks. I think he's going to simplify what Nico has to do in this game. He's not going to ask a lot from him. It's going to be one read, get the ball out. Like it's going to be a very simple manage the emotions of the quarterback game. I'm with you that Nico is a big part of the question mark. I have that much faith in Josh Heupel. Let me ask you guys a question about stream, okay? Because if we're binging Tennessee, Oklahoma, I can't decide. I got two games that I'm trying to figure out which we should stream. So should we stream USC, Michigan, knowing full well that Michigan might just be a big pile of dung this year and that USC we're not sure we can trust? Or do we go with the sneaky good Utah, Oklahoma State that may not be as sexy from a brand standpoint, but feels like from a football standpoint could give us some big plays? I'm genuinely lost on which one we should stream.
USC Michigan is the game to watch, Fitz. It is the reason is because of USC. I want to see what version of USC we get in this game. It's their first game in the Big Ten, a Big Ten conference game. How do they adjust to the physicality? How do they adjust to a Michigan team that, despite all Michigan's issues, Michigan will be physical in this game? They may run the ball 50 times. Their defense is elite. So how can USC play against that? I want to see what version of Lincoln Riley's team we get. Is the defense the now physical, long, athletic, getting after the quarterback type of defense that we saw against LSU? Or are they the USC defense we've seen the last couple of years in college football? This game is USC's first test in the Big Ten Conference. And I'll be watching this whole thing because I want to know which kind of USC we are getting.
I agree with everything that Adam just said. For me, it's USC Michigan, and it has nothing to do with Michigan, and it has everything to do with USC because my mind's made up about Michigan. I know what Michigan is, and they're a 7-5 and 8-4 football team, and that's okay. That's okay. But Utah, Oklahoma State is exactly what you just said, Fitz. It's sneaky. Like, it is a sneaky good game. I think I'm streaming USC Michigan over that game. That game to me is more important in results rather than process. If we're talking about the race for the Big 12, because we talked about this before on the podcast, that might be the deepest conference in college football just because there's like 10 teams that could win that conference. This is an incredibly pivotal game for the race for the Big 12. So it's more about outcome. Who won this game? Okay, that instantly catapult to be one of the favorites to win the conference. For me, USC Michigan is more about USC's process.
There's so many similarities between Utah and Oklahoma State as well, just how they build their programs and the talent development and how they build it through high school recruiting. These two programs with Mike Gundy and Kyle Whittingham, they're so similar in that mold that game has all the makings to be one that comes down the final possession and ultimately who has the football last in this game.
The only thing I could ask in honor of the Power Hour is if you're watching USC Michigan, just take a shot every time they tell you on the broadcast that USC put on 1,400 pounds as a team to prepare for the big game. I feel like every single game they're like 1,400 pounds. Like I've had that number drilled into my head. I feel like it's going to be at least 6 or 7 times. Drink responsibly, kids, and then make sure that you Uber wherever you're going. But if you take a shot every time you hear 1,400, it's going to be a long night for you.
USC's 1,400 pounds. The fact that Ryan Williams at Alabama is 17 years old and he should be in high school right now. How many times do we think the Josh Heupel quarterback at Oklahoma story is going to be told on Saturday in Norman? Take a shot for every single one of those and good luck.
We need to start like a storyline parlay where we'll come up with the 3 storylines we think are going to get abused during the course of the broadcast and then see if we're right. This is an amazing idea. No way to take action on it, but it's an amazing idea. Okay, if we figured out binge and stream, Caroline, what game should we skip?
Is it fair to say that I'm skipping NC State Clemson?
Come on.
Like, I know that's an important game in the grand scheme of the ACC. Is it like... I think that it has more to do with my belief in my, really overall my belief in the ACC as a conference as a whole. I guess the one storyline that I'm looking for is which Clemson are we going to get? Are we going to get the Clemson that couldn't move the ball against Georgia? Or are we going to get the Clemson that put up 800 yards of offense against App State? Like, that's what I want to figure out throughout the course of the season. But frankly, Adam, I don't think that NC State's defense is good enough for me to get a fair evaluation of exactly what Clemson is.
Yeah, I'm watching NC State Clemson to see what version of Kate Klubnik we get. Do we get the guy who threw for 400 yards against App State, or do we get the guy who was a dud against Georgia? Granted, one of the best teams in the country, but played terrible football at quarterback, turned it over, didn't get it out of his hand fast enough. Which version do we get of the former 5-star quarterback? This is a chance for Clemson to get their season back on track with a win here. It's a game they should win, and if they win this game now, everyone kind of forgets about the Week 1 loss against Georgia, and their season is now back where they thought it would be. But can you imagine if Dabo Swinney loses this game to NC State, who lost by 41 points to Tennessee? Dabo Swinney may be getting run out of town at Clemson. So it's a big game for Clemson for a lot of respects. Coming off a bye as well. Yes, it is a big game for Dabo Swinney, and might I call it a must-win game for Clemson.
Ooh, a must-win. Look, the real reason that it's hard to skip is it's on at noon, and there aren't really any other ranked matchups at noon. That's the real reason it's hard to skip.
You just go apple picking instead.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on this one. Like, if I had the choice between like the figuring out how to watch that game or, I don't know, dusting my furniture, it's going to be tight. Like, I'm going to have the game on in the background. I'll have the audio on while I pledge everything and just make sure that the house is nice and shiny. It's a pledge game.
Your house is going to smell so nice.
My house is immaculate. I'm going to be honest. I'm kind of a clean freak, especially like for a guy. Like, people never expect that. I'm kind of a clean freak.
Guys, I was looking at some of the games on the slate, and it got me thinking about, I was looking at the Marshall-Ohio State game, looking at Ohio State's schedule. Isn't it crazy how in the first few weeks of college football, some of these schedules are so drastically different than others? I mean, Ohio State has Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall with a bye week in between the first 4 weeks of the season. And then you get teams like Kentucky and Georgia playing each other. I mean, it's just crazy how the college football scheduling world happens. And Ohio State and Georgia are competing for top few teams in the country, yet Ohio State has a cakewalk for the first 4 weeks of the season. It's just wild that there's no parity from a scheduling standpoint, but you look at every other league in sports, and there is some kind of even scheduling early on in the year to make sure that one team doesn't have an advantage over the other. It's a point I've heard head coaches talk about a lot, is that people get mad about Penn State not scheduling Pitt every year as a non-conference game. And Coach Franklin's like, why would we want to schedule another even remotely difficult non-conference game? We don't get rewarded for beating tough teams. We get rewarded for being undefeated. It's just crazy how college football scheduling works nowadays.
Which is exactly why I don't have a problem with Wake Forest paying Ole Miss out for the trip to Oxford they were supposed to take next season. Like, I don't have a problem with that. You can call them weak. You can call them scared of competition all you want. That's fine. If I'm Wake Forest, my number one priority is winning football games and getting to a bowl game. Like, that's what I care about. So if going on the road to Oxford and getting blown out by Ole Miss by 50 points puts an extra $1 million in my pocket, is that really worth it? I have no problem with that.
Not worth it for what it does on the recruiting trail either, because there's a ton of kids out there that's the only Wake Forest football game they're going to see this year. So their mindset is going to be all about how Wake Forest got their ass kicked, right? And that's like, when you walk into a living room, that is not an effective sales pitch when you come in and try and turn that thing around. I have no problem. I think we're going to see more and more schools say, it's just not worth the money to go through the embarrassment that comes with it, especially if you're a mid-level school. Like, I realize if you're a tiny school and you need it, fine. It's a cool experience for your kids. That's fine. But if you're a team that's, sort of in that mid-level bowl range, like, why do you want to put yourself through that embarrassment? I have no problem with it.
No problem whatsoever. Before we wrap up here, I did want to touch on a little bit more of a newsy note off the field that we saw announced today. This was announced by CBS Sports that Tennessee, who I have to give a whole lot of credit to, has really been on the cutting edge in terms of NIL. Pilot Flying J has naming rights to Neyland Stadium. They got a big bag for that to use toward their NIL. Nico Yamaliava was one of the first kind of big money quarterbacks. So now they have just added another thing to the NIL innovation, if you will. This comes from Ben McKee, that Tennessee is planning on raising football ticket prices in 2025 to help fund proposed revenue share. So Tennessee will utilize a talent fee to pay players and attract and retain the best talent to Rocky Top. I've heard a wide variance of reactions to Tennessee's decision to do this, essentially raising ticket prices to add to their NIL funds. Fitz, how do we feel about it?
I think this is brilliant, and I love every ounce of this, and this is the future of college football. And look no further than the model that we see in other sports. It's not uncommon for stadiums that are being built with public funds, for example, to have a usage tax. And that's their way of trying to share some of the cost to the people that are actually in the stadium. The importance of that is if you're committed enough to be in the stadium, you're supporting your favorite team. Well, you're the one using the $2 billion stadium, so you should pay for it. That's been the logic behind it. I look at this no differently. If you're a massive Vols fan and you have season tickets, and Caroline, you know in that area that season ticket waiting list is absolutely astronomical, right? Like there are people that flock to that. If you've ever lived in Nashville, you know, especially during the heyday of Vols being good, 40 East is the road that gets you from Nashville to Knoxville, and you get stuck on it on Saturdays because there's so many people from the entire state that want to get to Knoxville to watch these games. Well, why not take that group and say, hey, you want the best players? You're going to have to pay for it. We're going to make it a surcharge that goes into the name, image, likeness pool. That's a way of actually helping the people that are supporting the program support the name, image, likeness needs, because at some point, you're going to run out of money if your goal is to pay every player, and you also need the best facilities, and you also need stadium upgrades, and you also got to pay the coaches, and now you need, all this new infrastructure, all of these things. Like, it eventually runs dry. So why not have the people in the stadium pay for the kids that they're watching every single week? I think it's brilliant. Now that it's happened once, I think it's going to happen at all the major programs, and I think it's a very smart way to let the fans actually be part of giving back to the players.
Tennessee being innovative with NIL and with how they're paying their players is one of the reasons Tennessee's where they're at in the college football landscape right now. They have been innovative and ahead of the times and first movers in this space from the very beginning, and have had one of the best NIL collectives and NIL operations in college sports. In college football, guys, you either adapt or you fall behind, and we're seeing the schools fall behind that didn't take advantage of it, and Tennessee is ahead of the curve. I've seen a lot of people complain about fans now having to pay towards players and how much money do these players need. Here's the reality in college football. It has been a business for the administrators, for the coaches, for the sponsors, for the TV networks, for the conference commissioners, and for everyone else involved on a professional level for the entire time. It is about time. It is a business for the players too, the ones who actually put their body on the field and put in the work every single day for the product. And if you don't want to support the players, then don't go to the games. But there's going to be enough fans that want to pay 10% extra to support their team that they will fill that stadium. And for these Tennessee fans, if you want a great team, you got to pay for it. That's how it is nowadays. Welcome to 2024 college football.
It's a smart business decision, and that's exactly what college football is a business. And a lot of you listening are probably rolling your eyes at that. But that is where we're at. You don't have to like it, but that's the reality. My one question is, what happens if you go 7-5? The whole point of this tax is to attract and retain the best talent on Rocky Top. What if you're not doing that? And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think that Josh Heupel is a great coach, and I think that any young quarterback, running back, wide receiver would do anything to get the gaudy numbers that Josh Heupel's offense has put up. But there's going to be a few years over the next, however many years where Tennessee might not be very good. Last year, Tennessee was not a great football team. They were 8-4 with lousy quarterback play. So what happens when these season ticket holders, when these fans, when these supporters are saying, I'm not paying that because my money, the extra money that I am paying you for this talent fee, this talent tax, isn't bringing the talent in, and maybe nothing happens. Maybe they fill every single butt in that stadium no matter what. But I do think about that.
I think the hard part about that is, remember, the only thing you pay that you're buying when you buy a ticket to a game is the opportunity to watch the game. You're not buying the outcome. There's nothing you can do to assure that the flights and the hotels and the tickets and the tailgating and the PSLs in NFL stadiums, there's nothing you can do to assure that that results in an actual win. And I use PSLs, like the personal seat licenses that fans pay for at new stadiums in the NFL. Is just standard business practice. And you can ask the same question. Well, what happens if you paid a PSL for a team that wins 3 or 4 games a year and they stink? Well, the reality of it is, if you don't want your seat anymore, somebody else does. And as long, at the end of the day, we always make the joke that fan is short for fanatic, right? Well, if you're not the fanatic that wants those seats anymore, then somebody else will take those seats and somebody else will keep paying it. And they know that through all of it, they're going to still get their 100,000 people in these stadiums every single Saturday. I just don't think they're worried because they know that somebody else will backfill that seat every time.
This move is another example of NIL moving from just being donor funded to revenue generating. For a while, and Caroline, to your point about what happens when you don't win a lot of games, for the first couple of years, NIL was schools, NIL collectives asking donors for $1 million check. That's great in year one, but what happens in year two when the donor gave $1 million check and you guys went 6-6? He says, well, I gave you $1 million last year. I'm not giving you $1 million again. So the donor fatigue sets in. So these schools around the country are trying to find ways to drive real sustainable NIL revenue. And this is going to be a trend now in college football, is passing that cost down to the fans.
I think one other thing, though, that's important, the question that I would ask is what happens to the fan that now feels empowered to turn around and say, well, I pay your salary. That's the tougher part of this. Like, fans are already atrocious to kids that make mistakes in games. Like, they already are. And I say kids, but they're grown adults at this point. They're paid professionals. I get all of these things. Fans already treat the athletes that they're watching like garbage on social media all the time. It's awful, it's embarrassing, and it happens. What's going to happen when that fan now says, well, wait a minute, I paid your salary this year and you suck, so now I can say whatever I want to you? That's the bigger problem that I think schools are going to have to work on from day one, is trying to make sure that even though fans are now part of this collective, they are now part of this name, image, likeness, how do you keep fans from just being awful human beings to the people that are benefiting from the money that it generates?
You're not.
Yeah.
People are, if they're going to be a bad human being, they're going to be bad human beings.
Fair.
But I think we would be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that, I mean, I've said it before. I've talked to other people that have said this and listened to radio stations and podcasts that have said this. I feel more empowered to critique a college football player because now they're getting paid. Before it was, they're a kid, they're an amateur, they're 18 years old, mistakes happen. Now it's you're a $2 million 18-year-old. Like, now you have an actual price tag and an actual value attached to you, and there is a certain result and a certain outcome that people expect. People do it all the time with college football coaches, NFL coaches. What are we paying you $10 million for? It's natural. It happens. And unfortunately, you're not going to change people's reactions to it. What you have to do is try and change the way that college football players, or just players in general, react to the reaction. You're not going to change the way that people act.
Some of these guys are making a lot of money, and that comes with the territory of, if you're making from your NIL collective a $50,000 a month stipend to play college football, you're no longer just a college student who we protect you from the fans. You now are a professional, and you got to perform, or that comes with the territory. When you take that NIL collective money, when you say yes to those agreements, when you sign that NIL deal, when you sign the agreement with your school, and you're making $1 million a year, the school especially, but now also the fans, you're held accountable, just like head coaches are and just like professional athletes are.
And I will, as I always do, defer to my music background, and I will say there's certainly an accountability, even if you're a 15-year-old kid, if you're filling up arenas and stadiums, if you suck, then you are going to hear about it every single night. So you're right that, like, once you reach a certain point where money is being invested, people don't want to hear the whys and hows, and they don't really care what you come from or what your age is. They just want what they want. They want to be entertained. Are we not entertained? That's what everybody wants.
Mo money, mo problems. That's exactly what it is. All right, that is going to do it for us this week. He's Adam Breneman at Adam Breneman81 on Twitter, at Jason Fitz. I'm at Caroline Fenton 1. Like the pod, review the pod, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Tell a friend, tell a fan of your rival team, tell the people that you hate. Just go ahead and just tell everybody. We'll be back here Saturday night with a full reaction to the Week 4 action. We're out.